YouTube family, welcome to the show. Smash like and subscribe and drop a message in the comments as we take a trip down World Cup memory lane. Vamos! With FIFA set to announce the host cities for the 2026 World Cup later this week, we here at Qué Golazo decided to go back in time and explore how USA 94 contributed towards growing the profile of soccer in North America from a fringe sport to a mainstream pastime. With me to discuss the impact the tournament has had on the hearts and minds of American sports fans is former USMNT international, my good friend, 1/3 of In Soccer We Trust, Jimmy Conrad returns, as well as a man who has seen, heard, and called it all, the beautiful voice, the legend of US soccer broadcasting, Phil Schoen. Qué Golazo begins right now. Hey, everybody, welcome to Qué Golazo, Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter, youtube.com/Qué Golazo. Jimmy Conrad, we're on TikTok as well now. Qué Golazo Pod on TikTok. What do you think about that?
What is even happening? That is incredible. Congratulations. I look forward to seeing all your dances, LME.
I love it. And Jimmy Conrad from In Soccer We Trust. By the way, this is a heavy, heavy American soccer narrative. And don't forget to check out In Soccer We Trust. So much great stuff, including a really good interview with Brendan Aronson. Make sure that you check it out. Jimmy, Heath Pierce, and Charlie Davis. But it's not just Jimmy and yours truly. Phil Schoen, I have had such the pleasure of watching you, listening to you, that beautiful, soothing voice. And now you are here, my friend. Phil Schoen, how are you?
I'm just trying to figure out, does this mean now that we're on TikTok that I'm an influencer? Am I an influencer?
Yes,
is this going to impress my teenagers?
Confirmed.
You're officially an influencer, Phil Schoen. Isn't that right, Jimmy?
Confirmed.
Phil, welcome to the show, my friend. It's really great to have you. It's the debut for Phil. And by the way, we'll have our Twitter handles here as well, so make sure to follow all of us, including Phil and Jimmy, of course. Today, as we discussed in the intro, as we get ready for the announcements of what cities, what venues will be hosting the 2026 World Cup, a massive moment in American soccer history, to be honest, as we get ready for that tournament, but also, you know, looking ahead to November and the World Cup in Qatar and the USMNT gets ready. So much to be excited about when you're an American fan. So today is about looking back about, you know, the World Cup in 1994. And it was good to really analyze that tournament and sort of what's happened since then and how we can look at it retrospectively as we look ahead to 2022 and, of course, 2026. Jimmy, let me begin with you, buddy. Just, you know, I wasn't in the country. I was in Peru, still moving to England, but I saw all the craziness that USA 94 was given. As an outsider, I was just amazed at the spectacle and just how that tournament essentially evolved and Brazil winning in the end. But how did you see it specifically as it was leading to that? You know, we're going to get into before that because obviously the USMNT shocked England in 1950. You know, there was regional matches and pockets of interest in the Northeast, Cascadia, California. But, you know, just soccer in general, leading up to 94 World Cup, how was it?
Well, there was no NASL that had folded in 83 or 84, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think there was a thirst from FIFA's perspective, and I'm kind of speaking overarching. I wasn't really paying attention to this because I was like 7, but there was a thirst for them to break into this market. They could obviously see how much potential this country had, not only from a business standpoint, but let's be honest, with FIFA, it's always about business, but also from development and knowing that they needed a professional league. So it was a big surprise when they announced on July 4th, 1988, over Brazil and Morocco. US got 10 votes, the smallest amount of votes to ever capture being a host country for a World Cup. And everybody was pissed, Luis. Everybody's like, who are these guys? They don't even have a professional league. Why don't they deserve it? What are you even talking about? So later that year, they had the World Cup draw in Vegas. 500 million people watched it on television. And of course, we had it in Vegas because why wouldn't we? Oh, approximately, this has been reported, only 1 million Americans watched it. Wow. And there was some journalists, and I had to go look this up and get it confirmed, but some journalists said having the World Cup in the United States is it likens to holding a major skiing competition in an African country.
Wow.
Like they seemed that the World Cup USA seemed completely absurd and to some extent blasphemous in the eyes of the European community. And they were hot about it all the way up until kickoff of the first game. So it's crazy that there was that type of sentiment. Now that I'm older and have seen how the world works in a lot of different ways, I'm not surprised. But for me personally, by the time the tournament kicked off, I was in high school. We couldn't afford tickets, but I lived about 15 minutes away from the Rose Bowl. And what my friends and I did, and this is where I think my love for the game got planted even further, was that I went to this place called Old Town Pasadena where they have the Rose Parade and people congregated after the game because you could walk from the Rose Bowl to Old Town Pasadena. And we would go and just hang out with all the fans from different countries. And at that moment, I realized that the support for this sport is different than any other American sport. When you go to a baseball game, it's like, you know, you're hanging there with your dad or one of your parents. It's a little bit more about that relationship, and you're just doing that with a whole bunch of people in the same space. But when or in basketball, go to a Lakers game, you couldn't show up on time. You show up fashionably late. You know, I grew up in LA, so the Lakers. But so these were all these little things. It was like a cool thing to be there. But when you're supporting this sport, it's about being something bigger than yourself. And when you get to be hanging around the Brazilians who are losing their minds after winning the World Cup final, I think you really appreciate just how big of an event this was and what kind of ripple effect it's going to have for the rest of the country. And I think we have plenty of evidence as to how that's changed. And
a ripple effect, by the way, Jimmy, excuse me, but that went around the globe. We wouldn't have had South Africa. We wouldn't have had Qatar. I mean, forget about some of the other things if it weren't for the fact that someone was brave enough to give it to this backwater country. Now, I think over the years, as we just kind of saw yesterday, with what is it, $2.5 billion going to MLS. That's another thing that wouldn't have happened because now you're starting to see the fruit of that, just as the World Cup in some ways was the fruit of the NASL. That goes back to 1950, et cetera, and all the way back to the very first World Cup and before. Soccer has a huge history in the United States. It's just been under the radar and probably under a few mountains and trash heaps as well. But now finally we're seeing a lot of that fruit come out. And talking about Jimmy, some of the things that have carried on. I mean, Detroit, think about this. Indoors at the Silver Dome, they put grass down on the field and that was one. It's going to be a disaster. I mean, I guess the only real disaster of '94 was Diana Ross stumbling off
penalty.
How do you miss that, by the way?
Well, honestly, we got to give context. For those that don't know, Diana Ross was part of the opening ceremonies, and they had this big ceremonial lead up to her taking a penalty. And the goalkeeper was actually trying to dive out of the way so that she could score, and she missed it wide. Now she had to keep the show.
Is gigantic. The ball is gigantic. It's like a massive balloon.
I don't know how she missed, and that is one of many things, Phil. So I'm glad you brought that up. Another thing too that was happening in that World Cup that I think impacted the rest of the world was that this is the tournament where the back pass rule was gone because of the 1990 World Cup, and because of how stifled it was and how slow it was. They took away the back pass, which I think was incredibly important for the tournament overall. I think they almost averaged close to 3 goals a game after that rule changed. And then they switched from 3 points for a win instead of 2 points. And it just kind of forced all the teams to want to go for it and actually go for the win. And I thought that World Cup definitely, outside of the final, which all finals are a little bit tight, but it was a really entertaining World Cup overall. And I think there were a couple fundamental things. Also, Russia competed as Russia for the first time in that USSR. Germany competed for the first time as a unified nation. So there are a lot of things that were going on in this World Cup and that were really impactful for the world overall and for the U.S., of course.
Yeah, and it was the pinnacle, of course, of South American soccer as well. Carlos Valderrama and the golden generation of Colombia as well. And Brazil, of course, the eventual champion. You said something, Jimmy, in your story at the beginning, how, hanging out with different cultures, different people, that was a major impact. And I think that continues to be so, specifically in this country, a country of immigrants. All right. So, Phil, let's talk about this then. In terms of the World Cup in itself in 1994, during the tournament, and maybe even just after that, did you begin to see a renewed interest, a trend within the nation? You mentioned, of course, that soccer was still here, but in different pockets and sort of underseen, through the specter of the overall American landscape. But how did you see it during the tournament and sort of right after it happened? Did you see a tremendous jump, or was it still sort of a stop and steady?
Well, I would say there was a huge jump that could have been a huger jump if it weren't for a white Bronco. But you take a look at what was going on back then, and it was really this underground culture. And a lot of people who were huge soccer fans that had gone through a decade of the desert now getting a chance to go out. I was fortunate enough. I started doing ESPN and television the next year with National, but I was doing radio broadcasts from the Florida sites up in Orlando. So I was getting in the stadiums, getting baked, maybe not quite as baked as the Irish players. And I'm not just talking about the sun. But if you've ever been down to downtown Orlando, there's some fun places. And it was really cool to watch teams come into these establishments en masse and just mingle. You wouldn't see that nowadays. In some ways, because of the culture of the United States at that point. I think it might have been the last one where the players actually got a chance to be human and not just totally segregated into these little camps. Right. But as far as your question goes, Luis, it was the soccer fans coming out and so many of the mainstream media trying to shoot down this little tournament and the fact that no one cares, except for the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people that were down at the stadiums watching, millions of people that were watching online and were taking off. It was a huge experience. But then again, the whole just maybe the bad luck of soccer in America at that time that has continued, I guess, even into the start of MLS, the whole O.J. Simpson situation, and with the United States advancing into the knockout stage, where a lot of that glory that could have come and a lot of the focus ended up getting shunted off to a lesser network while the big networks were kind of chasing an SUV around. So I do think it was huge. I don't think that the impact was really truly felt until afterwards because there were other distracting things going on. But it was an amazing time to be a soccer fan.
Yeah, I would jump in and say that up until, I don't know if this has changed, it might still stand, but total attendance records were set in the 94 World Cup. Average attendance was 69,000 people per game. Mm-hmm. So it became to a point, to Phil's point, that it became undeniable that the game could work in this country. Now, there was a promise from U.S. Soccer to FIFA that, hey, we're going to give you this World Cup, but you have to have a domestic league that follows this World Cup. Yeah. And I remember thinking, okay, when is this domestic league going to happen? The World Cup happened in the summer of 94, and then it got postponed. Phil could probably back me up on this. I think in 95, MLS was supposed to launch. It didn't.
Yeah, and that's when guys like Wijnaldum and Ramos and everyone had to all of a sudden pack bags and head around the world for a year's work before they came back.
So, yeah, there was a lot that was going on. Yeah, thank you for that. And I just remember being a little bit frustrated that we had this momentum and it felt like we let it drop in some capacity. It was always going to be tough to just start a league from scratch and obviously to do it in the way that we were doing it with Kansas City Wiz and the San Jose Clash, and all these.
Oh, those names are beautiful.
Now, amazing now, right? I mean, people would kill for that because there's some nostalgia wrapped around all
a
that.
cultish sort of behavior to it.
Memphis Grizzlies, Titans, that never carries over to other sports.
No, it never does. It never does. But we were trying to find, and I think we did for a long time, and maybe even to this day, we're still trying to find that merge of respecting what American sports do in this country, but also respecting the game and how it's played everywhere else around the world. And I think that's been part of the struggle as we try to find our own identity, which is a bigger conversation. We can talk about that later. But I think also, and I think Phil brought up a really interesting point, that we had to win people over. And I feel like there were editors in charge, people that were running newspapers, people in charge of the media outlets that just didn't want to see this game be successful in this country. It wasn't an American game. It's a foreign game. And I feel like we're still fighting that in some capacity. We're waiting for these editors and guys to retire or die, and then we can get people in that actually love the game. And that's starting to happen now because people that are in charge are starting to give the game a lot more respect.
No, there was a subculture for soccer back then, and the mainstream, as I said, didn't want to waste any brain cells trying to learn something new. But because the subculture actually proved to be so huge, it kind of forced its way into the mentality of America and continues to grow to this day.
Well, interestingly enough, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we'll get into that part about soccer after 1994, including, of course, the dawn of MLS, the league's initial struggles, and then even further on, of course, the designated player rule and David Beckham, et cetera, and so much more. And then we'll wrap everything up as we look ahead to 2026, because the World Cup is coming back to North America and specifically the United States. Jimmy, Conrad, Phil Schoen, LME, Qué Golazo. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Jimmy Conrad showing his badge there. I love that shirt there, Jimmy. Phil Schoen, of course. Welcome to Qué Golazo on his debut as we talk about USA 94. But now we're talking about the after effects of USA 94. Obviously, this is about MLS and the dawn of MLS and, how the league responded. Phil, I believe that you called the first game MLS. Talk to me about that initial stages. How did you feel about that reaction as Major League Soccer, made its imprint on the American landscape?
Well, I mean, in some ways, Jimmy might have been part of that last generation that actually didn't really realize what it was like to have top flight soccer here growing up. And it's a little different mentality because when you're a youngster and you're going into it, he didn't really get the chance to experience watching the likes of a Pelé, watching Beckenbauer, or down here, Gerd Muller, Nene Kubias, Ray Hudson, etc.
Nene Kubias, you say? Oh, I'm glad you included that person. I'm going to keep going, Phil. Keep going.
and Rangan on the same team. Can you imagine it?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
To experience that and then all of a sudden just have it fall off of a cliff and to be absolutely nothing against Missile, nothing against what was going on in the NPSL, etc. There were some nice efforts. There were some great moments in the A-League and WSA and everything else like that, but it wasn't first division. So we have the World Cup. We prove that soccer can succeed if it's done well. And then as Jimmy talked about, the delay, which was smart. It's better to wait and do it right than to fall off a cliff and never get a second chance. So they made sure the first impression would be good. But in answer to your question, being there at Spartan Stadium in San Jose, watching the Earthquakes take on DC United, the Clash, excuse me,
amazing
marketing geniuses. And even then, just leading up to it, you had everyone down on the field. You had the jets flying by, parachutes dropping balls off. That is still probably my favorite moment of being a broadcaster. Number one, because it was personal and it was my trip through a desert as well. And I was almost a fan representative getting a chance to experience this up close and personal. Right. And it was very emotional to see the return of soccer. And then they actually kicked the ball off, and you realize there was still a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work to do. A lot of work to do.
Did the parachute end up landing in the right spot is what I want to know.
It did. And thank goodness for Eric Winalda, the ball did as well eventually. I was just afraid, again, thinking of the Rick Rileys and everyone else in the world that had their arrows aiming for a bullseye.
I remember that. The
first match goes scoreless, and you're going to the penalty shootout or the 35-yard shootout to decide. Amazing. But Winalda made sure there was a crooked number up on the screen at the end. So
and it was a good goal too. It wasn't
feeling, and it was the start again to where we are right now, seeing the World Cup about to come back.
Yeah.
No, it's I'm glad he scored as well. Phil, I remember watching that game, and it was a good goal. He made Jeff Agus and then curled it into the corner, and so it was nice that it was something worthy of oohing and awing about. If it had just been an own goal or something, it just would have still allowed the Rick Rileys of the world to well, let's look at this game. So I can't even score a proper goal or whatever the crap is, without really understanding the subtleties and nuances. But I was very proud as well that the league had gotten started, that there was finally some follow through on the promise from the '94 World Cup, and it gave kids my age a chance to see that this was possible in this country. And I think that's really important to the development and to the dreams of certain kids who maybe played other sports, but now there was a viable option to potentially play professionally here in your own country and to represent the city where you grew up. And that was I could only watch UCLA games when I was a kid. There was no professional league, as Phil mentioned. There was no NASL, so I had to go watch the LA Lasers and indoor soccer.
What a name.
And amazing. Or the San Diego Sockers. I would
no way. That's the name.
And by the way, don't mess with them. They're amazing. Or they were.
Are like one of the most accomplished indoor teams in the history of
that is we need to bring all these names back. I don't know what needs to happen, but we need to revitalize that. I love everything about it.
Hey, Jimmy, you need to make sure that Luis wears a Colorado Caribou jersey to the
Oh my God, what a name. I just like the idea of these owners. It's 3 a.m. They're wasted and they're just I'm gonna call my team the San Diego Sockers because I want to.
Dude, they are ballers. That's with a K. It's with the K.
Even better.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just go and look at all the nicknames over the years.
But Jimmy, would you say then that the next stage then, right, leading up to that, after a few years now, MLS developing, or at the very least trying to go step by step, then comes 2007, right? And then comes obviously David Beckham's arrival, the designated player rule. Would you say that that's really the next step, that not only elevated the league, or maybe made it, at the very least, from a marketing perspective, notable?
Yeah, I would say that I played through a portion of MLS 1.0 and MLS 2.0, and I'd say that 2.0 started when David Beckham came into the league. In MLS 1.0, I'll give you an example. When I didn't get drafted. When I got signed by the San Jose Clash, we would have to go change at Spartan Stadium. Okay, but we couldn't use San Jose State. That's where we couldn't use their fields. We couldn't use the fields that were right outside of our locker room.
Oh my God.
We had to get in cars and drive 30+ minutes down to a youth facility in Morgan Hill. For everybody that's in the Bay Area, is like, are you insane? Then, because you're like, I don't want to drive back after practice and go back there, because you probably live closer to this field than you do to the locker room.
You stay overnight there or whatever.
Well, yeah, you stay overnight in these little sleeping tags and tents. That'd be amazing. But no, we would change out of the trunk of our cars and hand our dirty stuff to the equipment manager, or our equipment manager's like, I can't take all of this. You have to go wash your own stuff for that. I mean, it's insane that was our.
God. No, and now, Jimmy, we're at the point where you have young guys like Kobe Henry, who never even played in MLS. He's down in the lower divisions, signing $1 million deals to play in the first division in France.
It's unbelievable, Phil. I mean, it's crazy. And there's like $100 million training facilities now. I can't, in some ways, I can't even believe that it's real. And not that these guys that have never experienced are spoiled, but they are kind of spoiled. You know, they got the goods. They have everything at their disposal now to be top players, and there really is no excuse if they can't squeeze everything out of what they have. Whereas the rest of us,
because of your story, though, that it's come to this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, somebody had to walk the path, and that was my time to make that happen. But when Beckham came in, I want to use this story as an example, because when Beckham came in, he would hear about this stuff. And he would be like, what the hell? This isn't you can't treat people like this.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
hold on, let me do the Beckham impression. This can't be right. I've got to go there and sort it out.
That's amazing.
No, but by the way, Jimmy's talking truth here, because it was basically David Beckham sitting in first class, looking back at all the other guys who were cramped like 8 to a seat. And he ends up going back and joining them for a bit and then changing it. He started the procedure, and now we see a lot more of it, especially with international play, that we end up having charter flights. I mean, you're staying in better hotels, eating at better restaurants, better training grounds. And those are things you don't think about with David Beckham. You're thinking about bringing in maybe other names. But because of that, things that maybe Donadoni, Echeverry, Valderrama put up with or were given separate treatment, David Beckham kind of lifted the entire league.
Yeah. Well, we would hear as players how the Galaxy were being treated. And at this point, we weren't unionized, right? There was no players union yet.
So what did you feel as players, as your teammates?
That's super cool that Beckham's getting that change for the Galaxy, but now feels like an advantage that the Galaxy has.
The disparity is like insane. Right.
Not only did they sign him to big money and they got a top player, and it was cool because once Beckham signed, the whole league became a water cooler topic, and people are like, dude, did you hear Beckham sign in MLS? Yeah. That's crazy. He's coming up here in like 2 weeks. You want to go? Like, we never had that type of buzz before. So there was.
No, I was actually on a plane with Ty Keogh and Frank Yallop, and there must have been like 6 people on this plane. And Frankie's like halfway back. Everyone else is in the front. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And I think Frankie knew what he was in for, because now could you imagine managing with the media horde coming in and all the attention and trying to tell David Beckham what to do. Now, the good thing was, and I think one of the reasons it worked is, while Beckham knew how things should be, he also was a perfect teammate, a captain, a leader. A lot of the stuff that he might complain about was probably done behind closed doors, had other people perhaps bring it up. He was not the disruption that I think Yallop might have feared. But if you notice, Frank Yallop didn't stick around as manager much longer because they needed someone who could perhaps handle that. And it was this whole change. Now you're seeing bigger managers come in, younger managers, new styles. Yeah. And I think it's, again, transition to the point where we do have the headliners. Not all of them are as successful as Gonzalo Higuain, but you're also starting to see some of the younger players come up. And with the importance of the academies and selling players off, it's not just Dallas anymore, the Dallas and the Red Bulls. Every single one, they're bringing players down from Alaska. I mean, it used to be, if you didn't live in the shadow of the stadium, good luck. But now I think MLS has joined the real world.
Yeah, and it set the trend, as you mentioned, specifically the Galaxy. When somebody like Zlatan Ibrahimovic comes to the league, it's like, well, historically, we can deal with this and we can kind of turn it into, at the very least, the same thing than how, well, not exactly the same, but how Beckham arrived to the league.
And some people talk about retirement leagues, Luis. Sorry, and Jimmy,
no, go ahead, buddy. Go ahead.
Some people talk about retirement leagues, but you need to have those superstars.
I was going to say
to draw the attention, to get the media to throw $250,000
a year. You need a balance. It can't just be one thing. It needs
to have the journeyman, the Rui Diaz's, etc. Bring up another Peruvian.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
No problem. But then, and then you need to have the youngsters coming through to keep the pipeline flowing. You need to get them in the door, but then you need to show them something to get them to come back.
There are three things in MLS that I feel always need to be specific in order for it to continue to grow, which is, I believe, what it's doing. And what you just said, right? These stars that have proved their worth in Europe and coming here, fine. But the second part is the developing of talent within the country, and also the thing that I personally like the most is the extra focus on Latin American yet undiscovered talent that comes in. And that's going to be a massive part. Jimmy, go ahead, jump in.
No, I was just going to jump in and piggyback Phil's sentiments about signing these players. Yes, you know, we get a Wayne Rooney or whatever, they're past their sell date, Zlatan. But when they come in, there's still a standard that they've seen in their career. And I think that it's up to the organization that signs these players to listen to what these guys have to say. It might be construed as he's high maintenance and this and that, but I think what the Galaxy did and smartly did with David Beckham was that Tim Leiweke, who really kind of generated this idea of a designated player and getting Beckham to sign, and one of the architects of all that, he listened and then he did something about it, because there's been a lot of executives, we talked to a lot of people along the way, us players, that this isn't right. We shouldn't be treated like this. If you want to be taken as one of the top 5 leagues or sports leagues in this country, this is not how you treat your players. And this is not how it should be. And now it's starting to evolve into that. And somebody, as I mentioned before, a generation of players or two had to kind of walk that path to get it to where it is now. And Zlatan still comes in and can probably still nitpick about how it could be better. But ultimately, and I think this is to Phil's point about getting kids from Alaska, we finally have an infrastructure that, okay, the platform's there, we can see the top, but what's the pipeline to get there? There now seems to be
the foundation,
a more of an obvious path to say, hey, if you do these things and you do it well, you're going to have an opportunity to be seen by proper scouts, proper coaching. And if it all works out, then we're now starting to identify players of all walks of life, to your point, Luis, which is very, very important. But even now, I still feel like our scouting could be better, our coaching could be better, our refereeing could be better.
Absolutely. It's not perfect.
But it's a continued evolution, and I think that things are moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. And making it a transactional league where now you're a selling league as well. I mean, the likes of Alphonso Davies, etc. But we're nearly coming to the end here with Phil Schoen and Jimmy Conrad. A great discussion here. I mean, I'm illuminated by all this. I'm just a Peruvian kid that grew up in England, and just reading all of this is amazing. But there's a few points before we get into 2026, because obviously that's the exciting part of it. But we cannot discount, Phil Schoen, the United States women's national team and their achievements and their journey, because I believe that, you know, through all the struggles the men have had, definitely from an international perspective, the women have really set the precedent. Obviously, our friend Grant Wall did a great podcast with this back, I forget the name of Blue Wire, I believe, a great show about the documentary on the women's side. But we can't discount the women's side and their impact on the game in this country, Phil.
No, absolutely. And in some ways, you can look at 94, and I think they use that a little bit of a launch pad themselves, because from the player's perspective, if you're a soccer fan, you're a soccer fan. Yeah. I think for many, many years, if you were a men's soccer fan, the women's game didn't really exist or was on the periphery. If you were a women's soccer fan, same thing the other way. And from a basketball perspective, I remember going back to my radio days up in New Jersey, and it wasn't just Rutgers, but a lot of basketball teams used to stop doing double headers because half the fans would get up after the women's game and leave, which was kind of embarrassing to the men's team.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to see that merge more and more, and that goes beyond 94. It goes into MLS. It goes through WUSA and into its current incarnation, et cetera, where they're starting to make that climb. And it's World Cup, Women's World Cup after Women's World Cup. It's seeing the likes of a Brazil jump up, a France jump up, a Canada jump up, where there's some competition going on. And the U.S. women actually, as opposed to just total domination now actually have to break a sweat and not just physical talent, but put some skill on the table as well, that they have progressed. And from the likes of an icon like Michelle Akers through Mia Hamm to Alex Morgan and the like, and Rose Lavelle right now, who's probably one of my favorites on this U.S. women's team.
For sure. Yeah.
A lot of that follows the same. And more we're seeing that merge. And I think we're getting to a point. We've seen little outreaches, and I'm not saying it's going to be a total tie together, but with these training facilities, the men aren't always practicing there. Right. The youth teams don't always have a tournament going on all the time with these stadiums. And congratulations to Kansas City, 2 beautiful stadiums, one for the men, one for the women. But I think we're going to start to see more and more, especially in the bigger cities, more of a merger and a cohesiveness between the two, maybe all the way down to the owner, or at least up until that point. So I think that that's going to help. And we're seeing it internationally as well, from the Olympique Lyon, the PSG, the Barcelonas. I mean, when you think about it, globally, and the U.S. women are a huge part of this. Was it the 2 or 3 biggest attendances for soccer matches this calendar year?
Yeah.
Have been Barcelona's women.
Yeah.
Over 85, 90,000. And so that just gives you an idea of what World Cup 94 through MLS into the women's national team, et cetera, have done. And I don't think we're anywhere near a conclusion on that regard.
What's crazy to me, and I love all that context, Phil, is that the U.S. women's national team had their first ever game in 1985, and their jerseys that they were using were hand-me-downs from the men, and they had to sew USA patches onto their jerseys. That's crazy. Within 6 years, they won the first ever Women's World Cup in 91. So the ball was already kind of moving in some capacity for them. We're talking proper legends: Joy Fawcett, Michelle Akers, Christine Lilly, Julie Foudy, Mia Hamm. I mean, proper legends. And it's cool to call them, or a couple of them, my friends, which is pretty surreal. That's my flex of the day.
Yeah, that's.
And then in 95 they didn't win it. They lost, unfortunately, in semifinals. But in 96, that was the first time women's soccer was ever had in the Olympics, and they ended up winning the gold medal. And even then, even though that Olympics was in Atlanta, it felt like their big watershed moment was the 1999 World Cup in the Rose Bowl, very similar to the 94 World Cup, where Brandi Chastain scored that infamous penalty, which made her famous around the world. And really, I thought, shed light to Phil's point about what was possible for women's soccer, not only here in this country, but globally, that there can be that support and love and passion and enthusiasm around the women's game. And so that for me was big. And it's all kind of around the same time where things are starting to move in a positive way of how the game is growing in this country. Now, there's been a lot of stops and starts with the women, and they probably didn't capitalize on that momentum, just like MLS couldn't after the 94 World Cup as well. But some of these things had to be done, and some of these successes had to be achieved, especially from the women's, who were probably having a bigger chip on their shoulder and fighting for more, which has been very cool to see it culminate now from a U.S. perspective, with the men's and women's teams working together to have their own collective bargaining agreement with U.S. soccer, and that everything is shared and everything is fair. And that is very cool. And that's now kind of setting a trend, because Canada's trying to do the same thing with their men's and women's national team. And so, yes, it's all right now. It feels pretty good. Obviously, there's still some issues in different areas of the game, and hopefully some of that gets eradicated and continues to evolve in a positive way. But just to think where we were, in 94 to where we are now, I think there's been some vast improvements. Now, I'd still say I'm a little bit impatient in some areas. I wish our men's team was having and enjoying this type of success that our women's team has had. But yeah, we still got some work to do. And I'm excited about this upcoming World Cup, and obviously the one we're hosting in 2026.
Well, that's where we're ending here, because to your point that Jimmy and Phil chime in after. Jimmy, I'll come back to you, Jimmy, literally just to keep on going and wrapping this up. It's been a fantastic conversation, but obviously 2022 is the primal objective. Months away from that, Greg Berhalter continues to build his squad. Of course, a lot of excitement for the USMNT fan. Young players not just playing in Europe, but playing key roles in big European teams. That's a massive thing. And of course, the development of a player like Colombian-born Jesus Ferreira, etc. But 2026, what's the short and long-term effect, do you think? What's going to happen? I'm optimistic as a U.S. resident looking ahead to 2026, Jimmy. But, between now and then, what are we hoping for as we, the day is January 1st, 2026, right? Months away from the tournament beginning. It's an expanded World Cup, 48 teams, a celebration of the game. We already know what venues are going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. What are you hoping for by that time that year comes?
Well, I think when 94 hit our shores, people were just like, whoa, this thing's a pretty big deal. Look at this. Look at all these people here. They're from all over the world. This is crazy. You know, and there was kind of that shock and awe. And now I want to see with 2026 that it's just so undeniable that the people that were maybe shocked and all like, no, you can see it coming the whole time. And this game's amazing. And look how much it brings people together. And so you want the big brands. You want more big brands to buy in from a business perspective. You want the Apple TVs to invest in the domestic league. You want there to continue to be this legitimate buy-in from the people that control the media in this country so that it continues to get the love and respect that it deserves on the men's and women's side, despite this being a men's World Cup. Now, I heard there's rumors that the women's World Cup in 2027 could be in the U.S. as well. That would be awesome to have back-to-back World Cups in consecutive summers. But I think it's going to get to a point where the people that have been gatekeeping and not allowing soccer to grow in this country will have no other choice but to open the gate and let us in some ways compete fairly to try to really nudge our way in as a major sport in this country.
Well, even more so than in 94, Jimmy. Before in 94, there was this underground media. I don't know if people remember. It kind of like what RSS is today, where you had to kind of go online, Facebook chat rooms and the like. We talked about the Women's World Cup. I remember in 91, good luck trying to find I don't even think it was televised, or if it was, it never made it outside of China and the like. But there was this underground situation. But now things have been so nichified. I mean, just take a look at this podcast. You look at Sirius XM. I remember the World Cup in 06, where after some of the games that we were doing at the stadiums, you sit down and there's like truck drivers in Idaho and housewives in Vermont that are doing the laundry that are calling up saying, hey, could you believe that Morocco goal?
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. It was always there, but now even more so with the nichification, where there is enough revenue coming in to make things like this possible. We don't need the mainstream media anymore. And really, it's their survival that's at stake, not soccer's.
Yeah, you better keep up or you're gonna get left behind. Absolutely. The amalgamation of access, because in this country, I tell my friends all over the world, I can watch any game, pay a reasonable amount of money to watch any game I want in this country. Also, you know,
there's no better place to be a soccer fan.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
This is it, baby. We're looking good. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we say goodbye to Phil Schoen and Jimmy Conrad, we always end Phil here with final thoughts, and it can be about what we're talking about, or it can be about anything else, perhaps looking ahead to what venues are going to host what matches, Jimmy Conrad. I'm trying to guess where the final will be played. Jimmy, give me your final thoughts, buddy, before we say goodbye.
Sure. You want to talk about that? I hope that it's in LA because of the 94 World Cup final being at the Rose Bowl, 99 World Cup final for the women at the Rose Bowl. I don't think the Rose Bowl is even really being considered. It's going to be SoFi Stadium, where the Rams just won the Super Bowl, even though the dimensions aren't there yet. They're going to probably figure it out so they can make billions of dollars, everybody.
Well, Yankee Stadium figured it out. So
that's true. If you host in LA and you start the game at noon and it's covered, right? You don't have to worry about the elements and you can control that. I feel like that's the best time slot that most of the world can watch it live. And so I feel like LA might be the destination. I don't think it'll be in New York because it's not covered there and it's going to be super hot if it's a game in the middle of the day. Maybe Dallas potentially, because they have that covered, Dallas Cowboy Stadium. That's just my thoughts over there.
Mercedes-Benz? What do you...
Mercedes-Benz, maybe. I mean, a covered stadium might lend itself to being able to, because as I mentioned, you can control the elements, but it's got to hit as many time zones as possible so they can get as many eyeballs as possible. I just want to say about the men's team in 2022, a lot of our players don't have World Cup experience. A lot of teams are playing against or play big game tournaments. And not that we have players that played in big clubs, but for everybody that's maybe a casual fan to this, 2022 is just to gain that experience so we can absolutely dominate in 2026. Let's go.
He's ready. Phil Schoen, what are your final thoughts, my friend?
So many balls that Jimmy teed up right there. First, agree 100%. He was talking, he'd like to see more from this team, but this team has actually been built. Greg Berhalter had two jobs. Don't get embarrassed in 2022. Done. Let's make it to the World Cup, but build this team for 2026. And while there's guys like Walker Zimmerman and the like who are probably at their peak, most of this team is 19, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Yeah, I think the youngest squad that's going to be playing at the World Cup. Yeah.
At their peak in 2026. So that's number one. That's really what we're shooting for. But you know what? With the group that we have right now, there's a possibility of getting out of this group and making some noise on the other side, just the way that the ping pong balls bounced. So that's number one. Number two, I agree with you 100%. As a Rams fan, born in Santa Monica, and where I grew up in South Florida, everyone was a Dolphins fan, so I had to be different. But they made that stadium for all of the money that they spent, billions of dollars.
Yeah,
they didn't make it big enough for the world's largest sport. So, right. But remember back at, I talked about Detroit in the Silverdome, back at Giant Stadium, they actually had to lift the field up into the stands to get the corners right, and then put turf on top. So anything's possible if there's enough money on the line.
Yeah.
The one thing that I want to close with, though, is just as 1994 showed that there was a soccer community that had value in the United States, the possibility of what 2026 brings is seeing what we've seen north of the border in Canada now, knowing what Mexico's done for the past 3 or 4 decades, finding a way to get some synergy between all of these and work together. I'm not saying we're going to have a Wales-like situation. We already kind of do with Canada, but the real money is south of the border at the moment, where everything comes together with Liga MLS. But there's going to be more interplay between these, going to be more development. And I'm not just talking about these made-for-profit tournaments in the middle of a season. There will be, because they're businessmen. There are businessmen here. And as much as you love the sport, it's money that makes the sport turn. And they're going to find a way to give the fans what they want. And that's just going to make soccer in North America even stronger.
There you go, everybody. 2026, everybody getting excited. 2022 is a little bit closer, of course. Everybody should get excited. As a Peruvian, I'm trying to deal with the heavy dose of this American bravado, but I'm with you. My wife's American. I live here. All right, we'll make it happen. But
that vincula was just too perfect.
Phil Schoen, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you. It was great having you, buddy. Thank you.
Hopefully we get a chance to do it again. And Jimmy, it was fun watching you develop as a player. Didn't quite work out, so I'm glad you have this going for you now.
Yeah, and the podcast. No, it's great working with you as always, Phil. Great to see you.
Absolutely. Jimmy Conrad, always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you, man. In Soccer We Trust as well. You still keep rolling, right, over the summer?
Oh, yeah, it never stops. 3 shows a week in Soccer We Trust. Come hang out with me, Heath Pierce, and Charlie Davies. Conrad, Pierce, and Davies. It sounds like a law firm. Who's
the most annoying one?
Maybe I'm hosting, so they probably say me because I'm a little bit all over the place. No, it's great. We have a nice culture that we're being built, and the community. So it's been a lot of fun. No, it's fantastic. Please check it out, everybody. Some great interviews, some great insights. There's always previews and recaps to matches, but there's so much content, of course, on CBS Sports in Soccer We Trust. And, of course, Qué Golazo. We have so much, including World Cup content. We got transfer stories with Fabrizio Romano and so much more. Follow us on Twitter, Qué Golazo Pod, youtube.com/Qué Golazo, CBS Sports, and your CBS Sports app. You have all the Twitter handles here. Phil Schoen, Jimmy Conrad, LME. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we will see you next time. God bless America. See you next time. Till then, bye-bye.